So, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Ian Carlton. He is the director of the Institute for Quality Communities at the University of Oklahoma, where he works with researchers, students, and Oklahoma citizens and community leaders to enhance Oklahoma's towns and cities. Dr. Carlton is an expert in the implementation of transit-oriented development. Dr. Carlton has advised private and public sector entities, local government, transit agencies, regional planning organizations, federal agencies, nonprofits, landowners, and real estate developers throughout the United States as they considered urban development issues. He's a member of the Urban Land Institute's Transit-Oriented Development Product Council and a member of the Transportation Research Board's Transportation and Land Development Committee. His academic research focuses on transportation and land use interactions with a specialty in transit-oriented development. He holds a doctorate in urban planning and 2 master's degrees in city and regional planning and transportation engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the Georgia Institute of Technology. So please welcome Dr. Carlton to the stage, and we're going to do a brief video as well, right? Yeah.
Welcome. I'm Ian Carlton. I'm coming to you from Norman, Oklahoma, and I am there running the Institute for Quality Communities. And I thought that maybe besides just me, you might want to hear from some other people I know who know something about walkability. So I'm going to invite some other speakers up during this session to also talk to you about their expertise. And to begin, the IQC, the Institute for Quality Communities, was put in place by President Bourne back in 2008. It's emerging out of his strong focus on community and community development and his belief that a major factor in that is how we design our built environment and how that built environment affects how we live, work, play, and how healthy we are. Now, I see ourselves as a team. We have a staff who work with students. We also bring in faculty affiliates, including Sean Schaefer here in Tulsa. We work with civic leaders to help the citizens of Oklahoma reshape their towns and cities, reshape the built environment. And we do that in ways that can improve both the social ties, the sort of the economics, and the environment. All right, so now, if you can hear me, I'm going to move over to the right. They always say, present from this side, because everyone's eyes go back to the beginning of the sentence, right? All right, so whenever we're doing work, we always come at it from this standpoint. Anytime someone's going to repave a street, repair a sidewalk, do anything, there's an opportunity to address our quality of life through our built environment. And one of the things that we've found, and that is just appreciated publicly but also in research, is that people like places like this. A little green, seeing other people, people talking, walking. And generally, we give awards for things like this. This is Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was named the most walkable city in Pennsylvania. We really appreciate walkable places. Now, the only people who give awards to this Atlanta development are people who are focused on profitability. All right, this is not a human-centric type of development. And that also gets reflected in the numbers. So Chris Lineberger, someone who's done some research on walkable urban places, which he's called walk-ups. And these walkable urban places are places that since 2008 and since our Great Recession have recovered faster than places that are less walkable. Now, this makes some intuitive sense because these are places that did not cause or trigger the recession. There are many causes to the recession, but the trigger was the rise in gas prices and people in places where they were reliant on automobiles, unable to pay for their gas tanks full of gasoline. And so these places ended up recovering faster. And we know in these places people spend less on transportation, more on quality of life, more on their housing, more on retail, more on other things. Now, the way that we know this is that a handy-dandy tool came out of the University of Washington called WalkScore, which is a website you can go and visit, and you can see your address's walkability on a scale from 0 to 100. All right, and that is determined based on the number of destinations you can walk to within a short distance. Now, Researchers love this because it's nationwide, it's a single scale, it's easy to interpret, 0 to 100. We're all used to being graded that way, right? So when they model what correlates with walkability, researchers have found the score that you get on walkscore.com correlates with how frequently people walk. Hallelujah, it works. But also obesity rates. In addition, home values and apartment values, the rents that come to a landowner from being in a walkable location versus a less walkable location. Not to mention vacancy rates, and for anyone in the real estate industry, cap rates is sort of your multiple of rents to getting your price. So prices reflect, and risk in cap rates, that reflects risk to an investor, is reflected in your walk score. Also, commercial and multifamily properties. You can predict the price, at least a portion of the price of these properties based on walk score. It's going to be lower in low walk score areas, higher in higher walk score areas. And lastly, default risk. So that goes back to that last slide about the Great Recession. People were defaulting at higher rates on loans made in locations with lower walk scores, meaning people were probably paying less rent, etc. All right, so I'm thinking of a model of change for communities, and one of the first things we do when we're thinking about making a place walkable would be to study what's out there, what's present on the ground today, and then we might envision what we could do to change that place. And then we might build something, either infrastructure or social infrastructure, the capacity to change places to make them more walkable. And that's the discussion we're here to discuss today. But this is a cyclical thing. We do a little bit at a time and we move through this process of studying, envisioning, building. So in Tulsa, you could think about studying where your walkable urban places are. One way to do that in many cities in the United States of the vintage of Tulsa would be to go look at an old map and look at your streetcar suburbs. These are probably the same walkable urban places that exist today because that backbone infrastructure exists that is walkable. You can go and do a study like we had a team at the IQC do a study of the Paseo district in Oklahoma City, understanding all of the pieces that contribute to walkability. So once you find your walkable urban places, see where you can improve upon them. All right, so this is the learning phase. And then you can go and experiment. You can envision something and experiment with it. We envisioned bike lanes in downtown Norman, and students went out and actually painted them temporarily on the street with permission. And it lasted a weekend, and about 5,000 people came downtown to a vacant building which was housing an art show, and outside of it were these sort of pop-up installations that the students had put in place. Now these can become permanent. This is in New York City. This is a pop-up that has become permanent. This is a few parking stalls replaced with some seating. Makes a beautiful barrier and seating area between automobiles and this thriving coffee shop. I think if you Google coffee shop New York City, you might get this one. Fika Espresso Bar. And then here's another example in Oklahoma City of this experimentation around walkability. Parking day, 20 groups took parking spots and turned them into wonderful livable places where people could walk to them. And this came out of an experiment by an art collective. Back in 2006 in San Francisco, the Rebar Art Collective decided to put coins in a 2-hour parking meter, put grass on the ground, a bench, and a tree. You see it here. This is the original parking spot, just to see what would happen. And people came and they sat. At the end of 2 hours, when the meter expired, they took the grass away, the trees away, and they left. But now we have a group in Oklahoma City that is advocating for this. They got the city to pass an ordinance that allows you to put these in place temporarily or over a longer term. And this is the kind of social infrastructure that builds you towards permanent physical infrastructure and walkability. Here's another example of social infrastructure. In Denver, they have a group called Walk Denver, which may be analogous to some of the things you're doing with the Accessible Transportation Coalition here. But Walk Denver is advocating on behalf of every citizen in Denver for walkability. So they have an app where you can go and input walking data. You can also tell the city fathers where the sidewalks are non-existent or perhaps broken. And then you can also hear them advocating at city council meetings for an initiative called Vision Zero, which now has been adopted in San Francisco, New York, and other places, but comes from Sweden, and it's the idea that we should have 0 fatalities on our roadways. And it is the responsibility of our civic leaders to make sure that that happens. And this is an organization that's out there working in Denver. Now I want to go back to walkability and this measure of walkability, because there's another way that model of social change and physical change can go a different route to address walkability. Remember, walkability is, in this measure, how many places you can get to. So you can either address the infrastructure to get there, or you can build more places to get to, origins and destinations. So we can fill our vacant spaces with places that people want to go. We can build new buildings. This is in Dallas. And this place on the walk score scale is a 91, which is a walker's paradise, according to them. It's an A, according to an academic, right? So they got an A for walkability because the whole ground floor of this building is retail and neighborhood oriented. But the reality is that we can only build new in certain places. We can do the infill and try to fill vacant leases certain places. We can offer subsidies, but we can only build new in a finite number of places. We have to identify the sweet spots where markets, politics, infrastructure, and land align, and those are few and far between. There are only a few places in Tulsa probably where you have a market where you could build new places that are walkable urban environments. That's the panacea. It does not exist. We can't just go out and build all new walkable cities. Only in a few places will it work. And as an example of that, a study we did in San Francisco, this is representing the rent gradient. This is actually the condo sales market prices in San Francisco. At the time we did this, beginning of last year, they were about $2,200 a square foot was the sales price for a condo in these lower parts of San Francisco. So you should be able to cover your construction costs with $2,200 a square foot. If you're not, whoa, you gold-plated the toilet, the sinks, everything. The problem is land cost. So when you add these market constraints to the zoning constraints, the height, the bulk, and everything that you're allowed to build in these places, then you start to constrain the options further. And then when you look at, when a developer comes in and you run a pro forma on these sites, we ran the equivalent of about 850 million pro formas, all different size of buildings, different parking structures, various sizes. You find that in the end, even with $2,200 a square foot for condo, you can only build in a small area. This is the only places that it's profitable to build condo in one of the hottest condo markets in the United States. Okay? So when we think about building brand new, ground up, walkable urban places, it's very few and far between that we can do that. We have to retrofit a lot of our older walkable urban places, which is something that a group in San Francisco called Transform has done. Transform is an organization that goes out, they knock on doors, and they ask people, how do you get to work? Could we help you find an alternate way? Could we help you find a carpool? Could we help you find transit? Could we help you walk? You know, we could actually loan you a bike for a while and give you a discount on a future bike purchase. And you can see that one of their big goals, their initiatives, is walkable communities. In addition to social justice, transportation choices, affordable housing, walkable communities is the core of their concept. And there are a lot of other organizations in San Francisco that were also focused on this concept of building walkable communities. San Francisco Foundation realized that they were funding all of these separately. So they created a collaborative. So the foundation started to fund staff that oversaw the work of all of these groups to make sure they were in lockstep advocating for the same thing. And out of that came a plan here. The regional plan in San Francisco focuses on constraining growth to these gray areas by conserving all of these green spaces elsewhere. And by constraining the growth to these areas, the idea is that we can build more walkable urban places by concentrating our growth in those locations. So these are a few strategies to think about how we study walkability, how we envision walkability, and how we then go out and we actually build it, either the social infrastructure, the rejuvenation, or the brand new buildings from the ground up. So I invited some people here to speak now after me about studying walkability and what we know about studies, envisioning walkability, and building the social infrastructure. So first up, Rebecca Sanders is a Ph.D. researcher of biking and walking, who does studies on that sort of safety issue, and she'll be talking to us about this, followed by Sean Schaefer, will get up next, and he'll be talking about ways that we've envisioned walkable urban places here in Tulsa. And after that, we'll have Barger get up and talk to us about building the social infrastructure, and she's actually bridging into the physical infrastructure and how we build that right here in Tulsa. So instead of listening to a guy from California who moved here 2 months ago to Norman, I figured you should hear from people from Tulsa. So